Welcome to day 3. Today, we're going to be speaking about Hagar, the God who sees me. Let's quickly turn to Genesis chapter 16, verse 13. It says, Hagar gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me. For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. So we're seeing, yesterday we spoke about Sarah, and one thing that's interesting is that Sarah and Hagar are actually very, very connected. And the first time that we see that the Bible mentions Hagar, it mentions her in Genesis chapter 16, verse 1, how it says, Now Sarah, Abram's wife, had bore him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, The Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her. And as we continue to study this and read through Hagar, we see that number one, Hagar had no choice in the matter when she becomes pregnant with Abraham's first child, because she is a slave. But one thing that begins to happen is because yesterday we spoke about how Sarah took matters into her own hands. What began to happen with Hagar, now that we're in day 3, is that Sarah began to treat Hagar with contempt and very harshly. And the way that the verbiage in the Bible puts it is that she was being beaten by Sarah very, very harshly. And today I want to share with you guys 3 points. And the first thing that I want to share with you is that God sees and hears us. See, we have to understand that we're all born into this world, and we have this relational need to have our caregiver hear and see us. And here was Hagar in this situation where she was a slave, and she was basically forced to have a child by her master, and that child was eventually going to be her master's child. And she was being pregnant, and she was being treated with discontent, and she was being treated so harshly to the point that it made Hagar flee. And the Bible says that the first time that Hagar fled was when the Lord spoke to her, where she had this encounter with God. And he basically tells her, I see what you're going through, but I need you to go back because I'm getting ready to bless you. And the blessing is going to come from the house of Abraham. So I want you to be connected to that blessing. And I need you to understand is that God sees and hears us. And we see that it's so beautiful and powerful to see this kind of language attributed to God throughout the story. Hagar gives birth to Ishmael, and she names him Ishmael, which means God hears. And God commanded her and says, you shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. See, I want to tell someone today that whatever season it is that you're going through, if you feel like someone is treating you harshly, or someone is treating you with contempt or with wrath or with jealousy, whatever it is, whatever season that you're going through, I want you to know that God not only sees you, but he hears you. He sees and hears all of what you're going through. See, and Ishmael was the promise that she gave birth to be a physical reminder that not only did God hear her, but God heard her cries. The Bible says that God has heard her misery, which means her cries. Hagar sees this aspect of God so clearly and with such high importance that she is the first person in history, in biblical history, to actually give God a name. She attributes a name to God, and she calls him El-Roi, the God who sees me. See, one thing that I want you to know is that God is a personal God. It doesn't matter what you're going through. We're going to experience different aspects of God according to what our needs are, right? If we need healing, we're going to encounter the God who heals. If we need restoration, we're going to discover the God who restores. If we need rest, we're going to discover that the Bible says that come to me, all you who are heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. It doesn't matter whatever it is that you need. We find it through God because he is a personal God. And we see that with Hagar, that she was crying and she ran away, and the Lord tells her, go back I'm seeing you and I'm hearing you, but I'm getting ready to bless you. And that blessing will be the reminder that I heard your cries. What is it that God is getting ready to bless you with that's going to be a reminder to you that he has heard your cries? Number 2, I want you to understand is that God provides. God provides. See, God didn't just hear her and see her and do nothing. He kept his promises with her. He made Ishmael a great nation and provided a way for Hagar to escape from her oppressors. And he does the same for us. Later on, even as Ishmael grew, the Bible says that then Sarah and Abraham casted them out. And the Bible says that there was this time where Ishmael, she goes with the young boy Ishmael and she runs out of water. Right, the Bible tells us in Genesis chapter 21 that the first time that Hagar encounters the angel of the Lord in the desert, she is by a spring of water. But the second time she's in a desert, to her knowledge, there is no water to be found. It doesn't matter whatever it is that you're going through, the way that you're experiencing God, it's never going to be the same way. See, in one season, she discovered God by a spring of water, and in the second season she was in a desert and thought her and her son were going to perish, and she goes under a tree to just cry and watch the child die, and an angel of the Lord visits her and tells her, you're not going to die. There is also provision for you here. I want to let you know that I don't know what season you're going through and I don't know what desert you're in, but God lets us know and he promises us that there's always going to be water in our desert, that he's always going to feed us manna in the desert, that if he has to send angels to feed us, to strengthen us in the desert, he will surely do that. Time and time again, with every biblical story in the desert, every time that people thought that they were going to die, God always provided for them. He provided water for them. He provided manna for them. It doesn't matter whatever need you have in the desert, God is going to provide for you. I want you to grab that. God is going to provide for you in the desert. So it is true that sometimes God waits on our faith to work in our lives, but he is a good father. He saw that Hagar had given up completely and was completely destitute. So he stepped in and provided exactly what she needed, seemingly out of thin air. There is nothing more that you could need more in a desert than water, and no sight more welcome than a well full of it, right by where you are. God made the impossible happen for Hagar out of his great love for her. See, you could be in a desert and we could be going through so many things, but I want you to understand that God and his love and the way that he sees us, he is always going to do the miraculous for us. So how many times has this happened to us in our lives? We give hope on something, but all of a sudden we get an unexpected check in the mail. Someone blesses us. We get some type of relief. The Lord strengthens us. We get a miracle out of nowhere, or a phone call we've desperately needed, a loving meal at just the right time. It would benefit us all greatly to remember that all the ways that God shows up for us is the same way that he did for Hagar. The same way that he did for Hagar. Number 3, I want you to understand is that God is faithful to the outcast. God is faithful to the outcast. See, one thing about Hagar was that she had so many things against her. She was a slave. She was a foreigner. She was a woman. Not only was she a slave and a foreigner, but she was a woman. And she was also hated by another woman over her that was in power, right? So her son was in fact the patriarch's first son, but even by God's account was not the son chosen to carry God's covenant. So that can be something that makes you feel kind of weird. It makes you feel like, God, what is going on? I feel like an outcast. She was a slave. She was a foreigner. She was hated by God. See, she was a foreigner to such a degree that she was an Egyptian. She didn't even worship the same God that Abraham and Sarah worshiped. And yet the moment that she had this encounter with God, she knew that he was the one true God, and she gave him a personal name so that she was reminded of every single day with her relationship relationship with God, God not only saw me and not only did he provide for me, but he showed himself to me in such a personal way. Sometimes we feel like outcasts, whether it's in ministry or whether it's in society, whether it's in our families, whether it's in our surroundings, whether we have childhood traumas that makes us feel like we're unloved or like we're constantly being overlooked and underappreciated. But I want you to know that God, he's always faithful to the outcast. Hagar was an outsider in every way, and yet God treats her with so much favor and kindness, so much so that she gets the privilege of being the only woman and the first person in history to who gets to name God, even though she wasn't a Jew. I want you to see that. I want you to see the power in that. As we're going through this phenomenal woman, the first person to name God by one of his attributes was a woman. Woman of God, I want you to know that as you're watching this, the God that you're encountering in this season is not going to be the God of your church or the God of your husband, the God of your family. He's going to be a very personal God, and he's going to show himself in your life in such a personal way that nothing that anyone can say can take away the experience that you have gone through. And I want you to know that, and that there is power in you knowing who you are, and you knowing that even though I'm an outcast, even though I may not look the part or dress the part or fit into society, even though I may not have enough friends or a big enough circle, God has not only seen me and provided for me, but he's been faithful to me even as an outcast. Abraham loves Hagar's son, even though he is not the son that God had originally intended for Abraham to have. And God frees Hagar and her son from slavery. And God blesses Ishmael innumerably through his many descendants, like Genesis chapter 17, verse 20 confirms. And this is the prophetic word that God gives, that God promises Abraham through Hagar's son. And he says, and as for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will surely bless him, and I will make him fruitful, and he will greatly increase in his numbers. He will be the father of 12 rulers, and I will make him into a great nation. Do you know that promise still stands today? Today, you can track the lineage of Ishmael the same way that you can track the lineage of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You can also track the Ishmaelite line. See, what God is promising you in this season is that even if they've overlooked you, even if they've casted you out, even if they've kicked you out, what I have for you is greater, and no one or nothing will be able to separate you from the blessing that I have for you. Today, it's going to be a little bit quicker than other times, but I want to remind you these three things. Number one, he sees and he hears you. It doesn't matter what you are going through. God sees and hears what you're going through, and he's getting ready to number two. God will always provide for you. Whether it takes some time, whether it's while you're in the desert, God will always provide for you in the desert, whether it be water, manna, or parting the Red Seas in your favor. But get ready for God to provide for you in this season. And number three, God is faithful to the outcast. If you feel like you're an outcast, God is saying, don't worry, baby, I got your back. God bless you.